Welcome to A Bottle and Three Questions with myself, Mike Best, and Nelson Parry. Tonight we are interviewing Dermot Sugrue from Sugrue Wines, and the bottle is The Trouble with Dreams 2019. Over to you, Nelson, for the first question.
If there's a theme that connects all the wines in your career, for sure it's this incredibly high racy acidity and let's call it your weird relationship with malolactic fermentation. So we wanted to know about it throughout all the jobs that you had, from Night Timber, passing through Whiston and now at Sugrue.
So yeah, it's true. I hear all the time people say, oh yeah, Dermot, he never does mallow. And it always seems to be a little bit strange and a little bit of an exaggeration. But of course, I think there is some truth in it. Because recently, I've been making wine for 21 years now in England, which is a little bit remarkable if I think about that too deeply. 21 years of making wine in England is quite a career, really. Because the industry is so old. I seem to have been part of it for such a long time. But I think probably in the last, I think you could probably say decade. Yeah, I've favored, when I can, avoiding or blocking, however you want to call it, not doing the malolactic on my English sparkling wines, on the base wines. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, I'm always making our wines with long aging in mind. This is always a key thing when I make the Sugrue South Downs sparkling wines. It was maybe different when I was making wines under contract as a contract winemaker for other vineyards, when maybe their timeline for when they wanted to release the wines was shorter than the timeline that I'm looking for my wines. What characterizes the Sugrue South Downs range is the age of the wines. I mean, I was at the Indigo tasting last night, the 21st birthday of Indigo, and I was showing a big range of wines actually. The youngest was 2019, the Trouble with Dreams cuvee that you've got in front of you there. That wine's on release, and we're tasting and drinking it 5 years after vintage, minimum. Our 2018 Rosé Ex Machina is 18. We've got the Zodo, which is based on 17 vintage, Brendan O'Regan from 16, and our Blanc Blanc, which is from 2015. All of these wines, when I made them variously 5 years to nearly 10 years ago, I'm thinking about I'm thinking about when we're going to release them. And I want them, above all, to be fresh and energetic once they are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And I find that by blocking the mallow during the initial part of the winemaking before bottling, that this kind of harnesses the energy from the malic acid that we have when the wines are young. And then it allows that to kind of display itself as freshness and energy and vivaciousness and vitality in the wines when they have had 4, 5, 6, 7 years on lees. So that's really the main premise for why I do it. Of course, in order to kind of tame that acidity during the winemaking process, I'm always using barrels, or at least almost always I'm using barrels, old barrels and large barrels, in order to develop the texture of the wine and integrate that acidity over time so it doesn't stick out too much, so it's integrated and it's harmonized with the wine.
And how do you block malolactic? Like, what is your favorite way to do it?
Well, not heat up the tanks is the first kind of step. But really at the press, it's the use on juice, adding a good hit of SO2. I believe in SO2. SO2 works. It protects the wine from oxidation. It protects it from spoilage. It keeps it nice and tight and lean. And I do believe in using a decent amount of SO2 at the press, particularly if I know I'm not going to be doing malolactic.
And for the real geeks, Dermot, what would that look like in terms of the numbers of the how many parts SO2 would you add?
I'd go somewhere between 50 and say up to 80 or maybe even 90 parts per milligram, parts per million, or milligrams per liter. If I wanted to do malolactic, let's say, then I'd be adding about 50. If I know I want to block that mallow, then I'll be adding 70, 80, or 90. Kind of depends on the pH of the juice, but it also depends on what press fraction that I'm adding the SO2 SO2 to. So if it's the Premier Cuvée, it's the first 50% extraction, then naturally you're going to have lower pH and higher TA in that cuvée. Once you then move on to the next phase of pressing, what I call the Premier Taille, what the Champenois call the Premier Taille, and then the Deuxième Taille after that, which we never, ever use, and hardly ever use the Premier Taille. We can deploy that in other kind of other things maybe that we're making. But the pH is higher, naturally, so you'll need more SO2 to be effective. And there's more material there for the SO2 to bind to, so it'll be less effective. So I generally use a higher amount of SO2 on the Premier Taille, and very often we don't even press the Deuxième Taille, but if I was taking that, you need to use a slightly higher amount as well. I was going to say that the key thing really that I've learned, I guess, over the years, in order to be able to have this, this broad strategy of blocking the mallow rather than encouraging the mallow, is in the vineyard, is ripe grapes. This is absolutely the key things. It remains the case that we can make really, really good sparkling wines in England, even in relatively poor vintages, or at least vintages that aren't fully phenologically ripe, let's say. Vintages that maybe have been a little bit hampered by disease during the growing season, and then hampered by bad weather, not enough good weather in, say, September, but particularly October, the picking month. And the beauty of having very ripe grapes is that you're not forced to put it through malolactic in order to get the wine into the correct parameters that you want to make a sparkling wine. So I would suggest the only time that I'm pursuing this non-mallow strategy is when I know I've got very, very ripe grapes, and we've just gotten better and better and better. As a small company, as vineyard growers and winemakers, at how to optimize that ripeness and what risks are necessary to take. And we do take risks, we absolutely do take risks. The across the range of Sugrue South Downs, they are Chardonnay-dominant wines grown on chalk. That's what the project is all about. We take risks. I know always the very, very best time to pick your Chardonnay, and certainly the last of your Chardonnay, so you ensure you've got optimum ripeness that year, is to pick it just before botrytis obliterates almost everything that's in the vineyard. Then you have picked at the very last opportunity, and you've eked out as much ripeness as you possibly could that year.
Now, talking specifically about the trouble with dreams, is there any mallow or any partial mallow? Or do you, in case, blend some base wines that, where the mallow is blocked and some that are like completely, like 100% with malolactic fermentation? So how does it all work?
Yeah. For instance, in 2014, big harvest, big year, big yield. I did malolactic on the Chardonnay in 2014. Yeah. I had the ability to heat up the tanks, so I did that. So you could say, going back to exactly 10 years ago, isn't it? 2014 Trouble with Dreams, which was the fifth vintage of Trouble with Dreams. I'm doing it in two ways. I've got two grape varieties, really, Chardonnay and Pinot. I've got more or less half of that wine in barrels, yeah? Mallow isn't going to happen in those barrels because traditionally, when I was making those wines at Whiston, the barrel hall was the coldest part of the winery. And there was even a colder part still called Little Siberia in the winery. So that's never going to warm up to be able to go through mallow. But then the other half of the wine, more or less, I'd have in stainless steel tank. And that I was able to heat the tank and indeed then cool the tank when I needed to do that. But look, it's also, doing malolactic is hard. It's actually very, very hard. I tried my heart out in 2009 to do mallow on a lot of different wines I was making that year, because 2009 was it was a very big vintage. There was good sugar maturity, but there was very high acidity with that high sugar levels, high maturity levels. And I wanted to do malo on a number of wines. And because some vineyards had cropped so highly, there was a really high amount of malic acid in there. There was, not, in Champagne, they kind of, they'll do a very routine analysis to see if the malic grams per litre is less than 4 or greater than 4. And that's kind of an indication for them whether they need to do malo or not. In England that year, we were like 9 and 10 grams per litre of malic acid in the juice. Now, that's actually an incredibly toxic environment to put malolactic bugs into, onococcus bugs into, and just expect them to fly. Very low pH, and alcohol, and SO2, and high levels of malic acid, which of course you want the bugs to be able to eat, to gobble up. That's a very, very kind of limiting environment for bugs to flourish. So I actually had a lot of difficulties in some years trying to get the malo established in the wine. And of course, once you're trying to get the malo to be established, and there's always a lag phase once you do your inoculation, you build your mother culture of your bugs, you do the inoculation, you heat up the tank to 20, 21 degrees centigrade, and then there's a lag phase before the population becomes sufficiently large to actually start acting on the malic and start turning it into lactic. And sometimes that lag phase is really, really long. And you're kind of looking at the tank going, wow, I've been cooking this tank at 21 degrees centigrade, for a month and a half now, and it still hasn't kicked off. And instinctively as a winemaker, you just think, I don't want to be cooking this tank of wine at 21 degrees centigrade in December, I always had this strange little thought as well, and I don't know how scientifically rigorous it is, but there's a mystical notion to it here, is that, I think the bugs know when it's December in England outside the tank, and you're heating them up to 20 and 21 and making them think that they're, in the south of France or something like that in December. It's not the case. Sometimes the bugs just don't want to do something. And then other times, of course, we all know this, that, in the spring, malo can just kick off in tanks, even if the SO2 is relatively high. It's an interesting world, malolactic in England. It's not straightforward during the malolactic fermentation.
So I'd like to move on to our second question, which is fascinating one for me, asking about blending. So, of course, blending is a question for every winemaker, but the difference between a sparkling winemaker from a still winemaker is that you have to blend the wine before its second fermentation. So what are the key decisions, really? I mean, what are you looking for in terms of the flavours, the structure, and is there anything different than people might expect for making still wines? I'm really keen to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I think blending is very, very often overcomplicated in its perception, and maybe we can blame the champagne houses for that, the great champagne houses for that, for always talking about the mysterious blending process of the expert chef de cave, and following on from generations and à la tombe de mon grand-père, blah 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 blah. It's really not that complicated, I'd suggest, or at least once you gain experience of it, it's like, any of us, and particularly you two guys, I would suggest, you've tasted a million wines in your time, and the detailed files that you build up from tasting all of those wines then becomes a depository of information that you draw on automatically when you taste new wines, other wines, whatever. It's the same, really. It's the same but different. It's the same when you're a winemaker and you're making a very specific and distinct style of wine for a long period of time in the same place. You really do build up that kind of muscle memory of what you're looking for and what a single wine doesn't have and what other wines will give to that. And I've always approached it very pragmatically. If I've got 10 tanks, let's say, and the goal is to make 6 of them into one wine and make 4 of them into another wine or whatever, and then you start the jigsaw puzzle piece. Well, that always starts for me before Christmas. You can see how the wines after alcoholic first fermentation are starting to play themselves out. If you're heating up your tanks, it gets a little bit muddled because you can't taste stuff very well that's full of bugs and 21 degrees centigrade. That's not funny, or that's not fun, I should say. But early on in the winemaking process, and then certainly once we go into January, February, and cold temperatures, and the wines start to show their definition, then that's when I'm kind of assimilating what's good about them and what maybe they lack. And I always just think of it as a wine has got three stages. It's the attack, the start, it's the middle, it's the finish. And if you've got a tank of wine, it's like, wow, that's a great attack, really interesting mid palate. And then the finish is really, really good and detailed. Wow, that's a great bit of material. And arguably, you could make a wine on its own with that tank. Other tanks then you may have a little bit of a great attack and then just kind of wander around in the center of the palate and not be terribly interesting and have a good finish, or the other way around. Some wines are just really, really short. They can have a great nose. They can show something really interesting like that. But each wine, I look for the component parts of each wine, and then how to enhance them with other wines which have got a different balance like that. You've also got to have a pretty good vision of what it is you want to make before you know it, and that really will come together at the time of harvest. You get an idea. Wow, this isn't going to be a Chardonnay year. The Pinots are the ones that are going to sing here. So I think I'm going to scrap the idea of trying to make a super Blanc Blanc this year, because guess what? You don't have the component parts. You don't have the raw ingredients to do that. So there's a lot of I follow the wines almost obsessively, I would suggest, and maybe if it's my dentist would suggest that if I was to taste those young wines less, then my teeth would probably be in better condition than they are now, but that's just the part of it. I love tasting those wines. I love tasting wines that are raw and vigorous, and I can very often see a lot of kind of beauty or potential in those, and then that guides you as to what to use, and then what maybe to I won't say discard, because wine is expensive to produce, but you want to direct and deploy other wines, other batches or components into lesser wines, should we say.
So, well, when you approach a tank and you have the sample there, what would you forgive that wine for, and what would you not forgive it for when it's in its raw state?
Well, the wine needs to be absolutely clean, clean and fresh. Reduction is a friend. I've not really got a problem with stinky wines unless they go very, very stinky, because reduction keeps things fresh and means that you're not going in the direction of oxidation. I always keep the wines on lees, of course, when they're in stainless steel, because that is that's a huge protecting factor. What am I looking for? I suppose it's just, some wines, they're just like, it's like touching a bell or something like that when you taste them. And other wines, they're just a little bit discordant, a little bit muddled or something like that. And that's really, again, what I look for when I'm putting together wines. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here, The cuvee, kind of strategy, the blend strategy right from the start of Trouble with Dreams was that Chardonnay-dominant wine, more or less 60 Chardonnay, 40 Pinot Noir. Now, that's what I say on the label of all of the Trouble with Dreams, that that's what the cepage is. It's not necessarily exactly that. Some years it's 58-42. Other years it's 63.5 and 36.5 or whatever. Because there's a biting point, and I think this is a good analogy. It's like your clutch and your accelerator in your car. Between these two varieties, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, there's a biting point between the two of them. And it's not the same every year, of course. But you do get it, with doing the different blends. So what I tend to do now is I tend to put together roughly a 60-40 blend, and then I polish that blend, either with the addition of a little bit more Chardonnay or the addition of a little bit more Pinot. And then you find that perfect bing note when you find that biting point. And I'm always kind of led by that. And those really are the very final tweaking moments before tirage. Before then, you have your beautifully clear, cold stabilized and gently filtered wine that you then put lots of sugar and lots of yeast into, and you completely muddle it up as you put it into bottles for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
You call this wine The Trouble with Dreams because I've read that in 2008, during the night, birds devoured all the grapes. I think that people forget the practical issues sometimes of running a vineyard, and I wanted to ask you, what does it mean for you to battle with nature in this way? And more specifically, how do you manage pest management, including birds and other animals, as you had this problem? And also, it would be really interesting because, when we meet up with you, we always talk about what happens in the cellar, but rarely what happens in the vineyard. So it would be great to hear from you about it.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I wouldn't say, well, you could say it's a battle with nature, but it's dealing with all of the hazards and complications that a growing season has, right from the beginning to right to the end. And the kind of first real hurdle to get over after you've done all of your hard work in terms of pruning and pulling out and tying down your canes is to avoid frost. Now, when you avoid frost, like we did this year, this is an amazing cause for celebration because that's the first real kick in the shins, knee in the balls that you want to avoid at the start of the year. Luckily, we're on the South Downs. We're very, very close to the English Channel. This is a big moderating effect on how cold frosts can get. And all of our vineyards have some strong slope, Mount Harry, and have Cold Harbour's got a good slope as well. Storrington is kind of on the top of a little hillock in Storrington, so no cold air ever tends to sit there anyway. But yeah, frost is a nightmare. Then once things growing, it's just all about dealing with disease, anticipating disease, and protecting your vines against disease. This is why it's so difficult to be an organic grower and make high quality wine in the UK. Of course, you can be an organic grower. I don't suggest you're going to make fantastic wine because very often you won't reach optimum ripeness because your vines will be struggling with disease. So we've got to protect against disease, and that means spraying. Yeah, we're as conscientious and as sustainable as we can be. We don't use herbicides. We like to absolutely preserve the microbiology of the soil. That's a hugely important thing. And I was one of the first people in the UK to bring in a Boisselet intervine cultivator back in 2008 at Whiston, so we didn't use any herbicides there, and we're cultivating. But the canopy, you need to keep it clean because the canopy is the engine room for ripeness. Two such contrasting years. 2022. Sorry, I beg your pardon. 23 last year and 24 this year. I actually got a memory thing on my phone. It brings up on my phone a year ago. This is it. I took in the vineyard at Mount Harry 1 year ago, and it just looked amazing. There were just bunches everywhere. Veraison had started. There were dark black bunches, and we had like a meter of just solid green leaf. Just looked amazing. This engine for ripeness. This year, things look different, man. We've had downy mildew that has really, really come in hard. Many, many, many vineyards have been hugely affected by it. Luckily for us, it's only one of our vineyards which suddenly has kind of displayed these symptoms. We kept it clean all year, and then suddenly we've got these symptoms now for the last 10 days. We can kill that disease, we can kill downy mildew, but it causes defoliation. You lose your canopy, and that's just a difficult thing to have to deal with because especially like a day like today, it was crap weather. I don't know what it's like where you guys are, but I drove to Heathrow and back today, and it was just horrible weather. It was raining, it was windy, it was cold. Now, if you're going to have a deleted canopy going into your last month of ripening, and there's sunshine, well, then you've got a chance. If you've got a deleted canopy and it's cold and wet and windy on the 11th or 12th, what are we today? I think we're the 12th of 11th, of September, then that's a scary thing. And of course, the next thing and the next challenge now is botrytis. But you can get so fixated on those things, like I was back in 2008, which should have been the first Trouble with Dreams vintage, and then suddenly, birds absolutely devour and devastate your crop literally overnight, the night before you're going to pick it. And it's just like, where did that come from? Quite literally.
Are birds still a problem? And is it something that happened because of climate change, or the birds finally they saw some grapes and it's like, whoa, this is something new, you know, we're in England, we never saw that, and they just went nuts on it. So what's the thing about it?
I think for sure. Vineyards are not very common. Suddenly, in this part of the world where there's never been a vineyard, or at least that's what we think, there's like from the sky, birds see, 1 million tasty ripe berries on bunches. Now, in recent years, we did something about it, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But in recent years, we've had more pheasants. I mean, there's a lot of big shoots now, bigger and more commercial shoots going on over the last kind of 10 years. And so, pheasants love, what do they love? Woodland. What's the perfect looking woodland substitute? It is, 4,000 vines in a hectare of land. They love that. And so pheasants are a problem, but pheasants are thick, man. They can fly over obstacles. Deer are a massive problem. If you do not have a 2-meter high deer fence surrounding all of your vineyard, deer will come in and eat your buds once they burst, and you've survived your frost, let's say. And then if you don't have a deer fence, deer will come in and they will eat everything. They will just munch an incredible amount of stuff. What we did after the catastrophe of 2008 not happening, I was picking 15 kilos of fruit rather than picking 1 ton of fruit. I got a phone call the next year, and it was from a lady, Lady Merrill Walters is her name, and she lived down the road from me. She said, "Dermot, I've just been judging today at a local primary school a scarecrow making competition. Now, if you'd like them, I've got 7 scarecrows here. Would you like them?" So I put the trailer onto the back of the Land Rover and fucking raced down there, and I collected 7 scarecrows, and then we put them up over Storrington for the next year. The best one was Michael Jackson. He even had little white gloves on, more scary than the others. And we then hung CDs and tinsel and streamers. You could see the vineyard from space. We haven't had any problems again.
So we'd very much like to thank Dermot Sugrue of Sugrue from the South Downs. We had the 2019 Trouble with Dreams, and the 3 questions were about malolactic fermentation, blending, and battling with nature to make English wine. Thanks, Dermot.
Cheers, guys. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Nelson. Been a pleasure. Take care. Ciao.